Hi, it's Steve. It's 6:30 a.m. It's June 15th, the middle of June 2020. Um, Today I'm going to talk about um, an idea, controlled imagination. And the reason I put controlled on there is because I believe that we all have the ability or gift, you might say, of controlling our own human imagination. So first of all, I'm gonna read what Wikipedia says the definition of imagination is, and as I read this earlier, I thought to myself, this it's very difficult to. This definition doesn't really. Um, it's hard to define what imagination is, and at best, this is a little inadequate definition of imagination. But anyway, imagination is the ability to produce and simulate novel objects, peoples, and ideas in the mind without immediate input of the senses. It also is described as the forming of experiences in one's mind, which can be recreations of past experiences, such as wild memories with imagined changes, or they can be completely invented and possibly fantastic scenes. Imagination helps make knowledge applicable in solving problems and is fundamental in integrating experience with the learning process. A basic training for imagination is listening to storytelling, telling narrative, in which the exactness of the chosen words is the fundamental factor to evoke worlds. So, you know, they when you really think about what the imagination is, it's that's a little. I mean, they're kind of placing this definition. They're placing whoever wrote this is placing a little bit of limitations on it, I believe, because they're saying that it's this or it's that. It's something in the mind. It's something you can create a scene, but it's so much more than that. And the reason I said controlled because the neat thing about living is you've got complete control over your imagination, and I mean it's infinite in its possibility is infinite. Just like if you take numbers, so number when you add 0 to 1, it becomes 10, and you add three zeros, it becomes 1,000, and so on. And it's actually infinite. It would never end. There is no end to a number. Each number can be bigger than the next, and it can go on forever. I mean, there's actually no end to it, and that's kind of, to me, that's sort of where our imagination is. It's totally infinite. Now, a lot of us think that our imagination cannot be controlled, um, and I guess in a sense, if you could let your imagination go. There was that in the reading I did. It was talked about wild imagination or wild images, and that may be just not being in control. A wild horse. If you don't put reins on a horse, we call that a wild horse, and it just runs. It can just do whatever it wants. It's just wild. It doesn't. There's no control over it, and when you put the reins on a horse, you can control that horse, and in a sense, the reins may help it to control it. It actually controls itself, based on the limitations that are put on it. So just like a number would never end, imagination is in the same sense, is that it's completely infinite. Anything is possible. When you say, with God, all things are possible. Um, in the imagination, it truly. I mean, in this present moment right now, all things are possible in our human imagination, and it's very incredible. It's a very incredible concept, and it's a little hard to wrap your head around. Just like the number, when you think of numbers, I mean, imagine the number one with a never-ending zeros behind it, and that becomes as many things as there is. I was driving late last night, and it struck me that it's summertime here, so it's warm. The weather's warm, and as I was driving, I noticed that there were lots of bugs out, and I had this concept. I looked up one time how many birds that there were in the world, and at any one time how many birds are actually in the world, and there was some at the best guess, a lot of people thought there were maybe 50 billion, and it ended up, I think that to the best guess, based on mathematical equations and sections and stuff, they came up with something like 2 trillion birds. I mean, there's a way more than 50 billion, which was originally what was thought of as how many birds there were. So there is a lot. And then if you consider, an average bird could eat a couple thousand bugs a day. So how many more trillions of bugs are there? And then you could ask, where do those come from? And it is that's sort of like the human imagination is in my estimation, that could be, as we are born, we're all given gifts, and a lot of us are given. I think a lot of us are actually given the same gifts, and the human imagination is the gift that all of us were given, and what's interesting is it's completely infinite in its scope, and yet most of us, possibly I'd say a lot of people, go through their life and never completely realize what they have there, and that it's a creative force, and it's all things are possible. Anything is possible inside your human imagination, and it can go to the good and the bad. But I mean, I believe you can we imagine our futures, and we imagine we imagine what our lives are actually going to look like in through our imagination, and and anything that you could conceive and believe, you can achieve, and it's totally infinite, and it's a little hard to wrap your mind around this concept of imagination. But I guess what I'm here to say is that yes, we do have this imagination, and yes, you can control it. You don't have to let your a lot of times we hear people that are hypochondriacs that are constantly self-focused on what's wrong with them. And yes, we all should pay attention to our bodies, but we a lot of times will use our imaginations to create more. I might have a sore in my side. I yesterday I lifted something, and it was very light, like a little hose. I just reached down and picked it up, and I got this immediate pain in my left side. And my human imagination, not completely controlling it, I started imagining that, oh, maybe I have, I didn't do anything, so maybe it's something else, and I started to imagine, some, maybe I've got some internal organ that's messed up and stuff, and I think all it is I slightly pulled a muscle possibly or something. But it's an interesting how, without controlling your imagination, sometimes you can go to these areas. This concept of being constantly thinking that you have to blow your nose or you sneeze, and you think, oh, I've got the flu, or I've got some virus, and it's amazing how your imagination, if you're not in control of it, it can sort of go wild. And um, I've got my granddaughter. She can take she can she can take things and imagine a tea party with little tiny cups, and she can imagine pouring them and all that kind of stuff, and you can drink them and stuff like that. But if there isn't any cups, she can imagine it, and it's like she just hands it to you, and here's the cup, and it's invisible, and you just grab it and you use your imagination to imagine that you're drinking it, and so it's very it's so infinite in its scope that it is a little hard to define. That there, the, like I said, when I read the definition here, it was just inadequate at best. I mean, because there's just so much more. It's something that it's it's that all things are possible. Anything is possible. It's anything that you can think of is possible. And what's neat is, you can have whatever you want in your life if you can imagine it and believe it. And it's a incredible gift that's been given to you. And I guess I'm just wanting to tell you that you can control your imagination. You can take that, you can take those thoughts, and whatever they are. I mean, if you whatever you can conceive in your imagination, it can happen. So a lot of times we'll put limits on that, and that's our the limits are even in your imagination. So when you begin to realize this, that realistically, if it says that all things are possible, does that mean, what does that mean? Does that mean anything? Or is there any kind of limitation? There's no limitation on that as I read it. So all things are possible is that anything is possible. All things mean anything. I mean, there is no limit to it. And that can go any direction. I mean, I've heard of people imagining. I heard about a guy that got locked in a refrigerated train car, and his coworker. It happened one evening, and the next day they found this guy, and he was frozen solid, and he was actually solid as a piece of ice. And they found a note. The door had locked behind him, and he pounded on the door to get out, and he must have had a lighter, a flashlight, and he found a piece of paper and a pencil, and he wrote down, I'm getting cold. He kind of journaled his experience that night, and he said he was trembling, and he finally said, I don't think I can last much longer. Tell my family I love them and all that stuff, and they found him completely frozen solid, and it was really sad. But the interesting thing about this story is that they discovered that the refrigeration unit that was on this train was not hooked up, and the temperature never got below 45 degrees as far as they could see. So, it's like, how is that possible? I think with the human imagination and your inside your thoughts is in your imagination that really all things are possible, including something like that. But now that obviously that is something that you need to control your imagination, because an imagination out of control or uncontrolled imagination could cause you to freeze to death and freeze solid when really it's not even possible. I mean, that seems impossible, but in the human imagination, all things are possible. And like I said, one of my trainers years ago used to say that the three most powerful forces on planet Earth are a twisting tornado, a raging river, and a made-up mind. And if you totally make up your mind with your imagination, you can become frozen solid without having it to be 40 degrees when that's not possible. But in your imagination, in his imagination, that was possible, and that's what happened. And I believe this is, I've researched that a little bit, and it does sound like a story. I haven't actually got proof. This story has been circulating, but the point is that I believe that is possible, that if this statement that anything with God, anything is possible, that that is that I'm sure something of that nature has happened. And so, again, all things mean there's no limits. There's no limit to what's possible. And so with this knowledge comes great power, and you know it's got to be respected and realize that this could be potentially dangerous as well. So and it can be completely wonderful. I mean, you can imagine anything. You know, you can you can imagine that your family is actually helping you. What's interesting is that, I mean, anything is possible here. So I could even imagine a friend or a family member turning their life around, and vividly imagine that, and it's possible that can happen. So, like I said, it's anything is possible. It's kind of an exciting concept, but the idea of controlled imagination is, I believe, one of the most important things is that we need to control our imagination and keep our thoughts on the things that we want and off the things, because just as much as you know, I've heard about people that have been in weather that was way below zero, and they were stranded outside, and in their imagination they lived and they were warm and they made it through it. So on the other side, you know, they should have froze to death and they didn't, and they were and they were able to survive. So again, I know there's several of those types of stories that are completely documented, that someone spent, you know, 20 below zero weather all night with, you know, with a light jacket or no jacket at all, and still made it through it with no frostbite and everything. So it's possible on both sides on this concept of imagination. So I want to just encourage you to realize that you do have this imagination, that with it all things are possible. Anything is possible here. And so control it. Use it to what you want. You know, you want to be healthy. You want to have a clear mind. You want to have a good body. You know, or you're sick, and you know, imagine yourself well. You know, you've got pains. Imagine that those pains are turned into are taken away without the use of drugs. You know, a lot of people, as soon as they have some kind of pain, they reach for a Tylenol or an aspirin or something, and I think in a lot of cases, most cases, that's not even necessary. That our bodies will heal, or those pains will be taken away. And the pains are there or not there a lot of times in our imagination. So anyway, I hope this encourages you, and we'll see you the next time.